for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. We have a lot of election news to talk about, including primaries in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Connecticut earlier this week. So we'll tell you about that. And we have to talk about something that happened for the very first time ever. And that is the election of a first black mayor of a small Alabama town. He was elected 4 years ago. He's been locked out of the town hall by white officials. And he's gone to court, and he's now taking office. So we will get to that story and why it's taken so long to get there. We've got a lot of things to discuss before we get started with today's topics. A couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We are recording the show on Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. Let's get to our first story here. This is going to be a collage of stories about the election, all from the Associated Press. This is dated August 14th. Donald Trump will hold a rally and speech in North Carolina Wednesday night that his campaign is billing as a significant economic address. Set in a Democratic city surrounded by staunchly Republican mountain counties, the event carries both national and local implications for Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris's presidential campaign is launching a $90 million advertising effort over the next 3 weeks to introduce the Democrat to voters and sharpen the contrast with Trump. The media buy marks her campaign's largest yet investment in messaging to voters, with just 2.5 months until Election Day in November. Here's some of the latest election news. Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate Minnesota Governor Tim Walz are gearing up for the Democratic National Convention with a joint bus tour. Harris, Walz, and their spouses, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff and Minnesota First Lady Gwen Walz, will start the tour in Pittsburgh on Sunday. That follows Harris introducing Walz as her running mate at a Philadelphia rally last week, underscoring just how important a swing state Pennsylvania will be. The bus tour will begin a day after Walz makes a solo campaign stop in Omaha, Nebraska, the state where he was born. Nebraska overall is reliably Republican, but awards its electoral votes by congressional district, meaning Omaha's single delegate is competitive. Both Walz and Harris will later in the week address their party's convention, which opens on Monday in Chicago. Meanwhile, the leaders of the Senate Intelligence Committee are warning Iran and other adversaries not to meddle in the election after Donald Trump's campaign said it was hacked and blamed groups linked to Tehran. Committee Chairman Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, and Vice Chairman Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, said the alleged infiltration of the campaign systems is a reminder that, quote, our foreign adversaries are intently interested in disrupting our democratic process, end of quote. The two lawmakers called on law enforcement and the intelligence community to investigate and deter attempts to influence the election. They said the U.S. would respond to any nation that tries to hack into campaigns or spread disinformation in an effort to meddle with the election. Warner and Rubio wrote, quote, "There will be consequences to interfering in the American democratic process, and the administration and both political parties must make that clear," end of quote. The Trump campaign said Saturday that someone illegally accessed its network and obtained access to internal documents. Trump has blamed Iran, citing a Microsoft report stating Iran had sought to hack into a presidential campaign. Iran has denied involvement. The FBI on Monday confirmed that it is investigating the intrusion of the Trump campaign. Two people familiar with the matter said the FBI is also investigating attempts to gain access to the Biden-Harris campaign. Meanwhile, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance is arguing to Rust Belt voters in Michigan that Vice President Kamala Harris is responsible for policy decisions he says have been, quote, "decimating the American auto industry," end of quote. During a campaign stop in Byron Center, Michigan on Wednesday, Vance told a crowd gathered outside a family-owned trucking company that Harris only, quote, "pretends to stand for normal Americans," end of quote, arguing the policy she supports on immigration and result in, quote, "flooding this country with millions of illegal day laborers," end of quote. By the way, Byron Center is just right outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, close by where we record this show. Vance has been ping-ponging among the Rust Belt states where margins between Harris and Donald Trump are anticipated to be slim in November's election. As he hits the road, Vance has been targeting Harris directly, along with her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Last week in Wisconsin, as both Vance and Harris ended up landing at the same airport around the same time, Vance exited his plane and walked across the tarmac over to the government plane on which Harris had flown, holding a gaggle with the reporters traveling with her and criticizing Harris for not sitting for an interview since her ascent to the top of Democrats' ticket. On Wednesday, Vance again levied that criticism, saying Harris, quote, "doesn't talk to the media, she just talks behind a teleprompter," end of quote. He also took issue with the way in which Democrats subbed Harris in for Joe Biden after the president shuttered his 2024 campaign last month. Vance said, quote, "everything about her campaign is fake. It's a fake ticket that never earned a single Democratic primary vote," end of quote. Well, actually, they did, because Biden won the primary vote, but Biden decided to drop out and supported his vice president. So there you go. Donald Trump cast his early vote in the Florida state primaries Wednesday before traveling to Asheville, North Carolina for a campaign rally. Tuesday is election day for the Florida primaries and some nonpartisan races. The Republican presidential nominee told reporters he would be focusing his speech at the rally on the economy. He's criticized the Biden administration for the rampant inflation, but a report Wednesday showed continuing signs that inflation is slowing down. When asked about the FBI's investigation into the alleged hacking of his campaign, Trump accused Iran of being behind it. He said, quote, "they are looking at it and they are doing it very professionally. It looks like it's Iran doing it. And the reason is because I was strong in Iran and I was protecting people in the Middle East, and maybe they aren't so happy about that," end of quote. Yeah, really. Whatever, Donnie. Trump said he did not want to say whether the information came from the FBI. Of course not. Here's some good news. A pro-Trump lawyer who is facing felony charges in Michigan of improperly accessing voting equipment following the 2020 presidential election has been disqualified from representing a prominent funder of election conspiracy theorists who is being sued by Dominion Voting Systems. Michigan lawyer Stephanie Lambert has been representing Patrick Byrne, the founder of Overstock.com, in a defamation lawsuit brought against him by Dominion, one of the main targets of conspiracy theories over Donald Trump's 2020 election loss. Lambert was disqualified from the case on Tuesday after admitting to releasing thousands of confidential discovery documents that she had agreed to keep private. U.S. District Court Judge Maxilla A. Upadhyaya wrote in a 62-page opinion that due to Lambert's actions, the documents that all parties, quote, "had agreed to keep confidential have now been shared widely in the public domain," end of quote. Meanwhile, Republican millionaire businessman Eric Hovde and Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin are wasting no time going after one another. Hovde easily captured the Republican nomination Tuesday, officially setting the field in Wisconsin in their closely watched Senate race. The seat in battleground Wisconsin is seen as essential for Democrats who know they must win there if they hope to maintain a majority control of the Senate. A win there for Republicans would dramatically increase their chances of gaining the upper hand in an election landscape that has Democrats defending far more Senate seats this year. Hovde is banking on his deep pockets and an endorsement from Donald Trump to knock off Baldwin, a liberal Democrat who's honed her ability to appeal to key independent and moderate voters. Baldwin launched a rural Wisconsin tour Wednesday with a stop at a farm in Merrill before a brewery tour in Chippewa Falls in a key swing area of western Wisconsin. Hovde aired 2 new positive ads featuring his wife and others touting his charitable work and his battle with multiple sclerosis. We'll talk more about Wisconsin in just a little bit here. Meanwhile, more good news. Donald Trump has lost his latest bid for a new judge in his New York hush money criminal case as it heads toward a key ruling and potential sentencing next month. In a decision posted Wednesday, Judge Juan M. Merchant declined to step aside and said Trump's demand was a rehash, quote, rife with inaccuracies and unsubstantiated claims, end of quote, about his ability to remain impartial. It's the third time Merchant has rejected such a request from lawyers for Trump and who's also the current Republican nominee. They contend the judge has a conflict of interest because his daughter works as a political consultant for prominent Democrats, including Kamala Harris, when she sought the Democrats' 2020 presidential nomination. Harris is now the party's nominee against Trump. The judge's daughter, Lauren Merchant, met Harris occasionally in 2019 but never developed an individual relationship with her. Consulting firm founder Mike Nellis told the chairman of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee, Representative Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, in a letter Tuesday. The firm, Authentic Campaigns, Inc., has not worked for Harris's campaign, President Joe Biden's now ended re-election bid, or the Democratic National Committee in the 2024 election cycle, Nellis added. Turnout in Wisconsin's election Tuesday was the highest in 60 years for a presidential year partisan primary, with over 26% of the state's voting age population casting ballots based on unofficial results. The election was marked by voters rejecting 2 constitutional amendments that sought to limit the governor's power to spend money and deciding a pair of hotly contested congressional primaries. The election was also the first under newly drawn legislative maps, creating dozens of competitive races in addition to other hot contests for local office. The city of Madison, a Democratic stronghold, had 45% turnout, the highest for a fall partisan turnout in at least 40 years, the farthest back the clerk's office has records. Meanwhile, a proposed amendment to New York's Constitution meant to protect abortion access is a crucial part of Democrats' plans to drive voter turnout in the state this fall and potentially flip vital congressional districts. But there could be a problem. The ballot question doesn't mention the word abortion. Arguments began Wednesday over a lawsuit Democrats hope will force election officials to include the term in an explanation of the amendment that voters will see when casting their ballots. The unusual legal effort begins weeks after the State Board of Elections chose late last month to use the measure's technical language verbatim rather than interpret it in its explanation to voters. The Democratic National Committee will offer a schedule of trainings, panels, and other programming it's calling Dempalooza during the party's convention in Chicago next week. The name is a play on the Lollapalooza music festival Chicago plays host to every year. The DNC said Wednesday that the Dempalooza events will be held daily at McCormick Place. The convention itself will take place at the United Center. Dempalooza events will range from trainings on how to use organizing tools to polling briefings and skills workshops. The DNC says these programs are part of its and the Harris's campaign's efforts to organize and reach voters in an evolving media environment and provide opportunities for Democrats to take what they've learned back to the communities that will decide the November presidential election. Dempalooza will also feature an expo with vendor booths and interactive spaces for participants to make friendship bracelets, get a Kamala Harris manicure, listen to podcasts, or watch performances by local artists. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris has a perceived advantage over Donald Trump on several leadership qualities such as honesty. That's according to a new poll from the Associated Press Nork Center for Public Affairs Research finds. Although Americans are slightly more likely to trust Trump on the economy and immigration, but even those numbers are going down because the economy is doing great. Nearly half of Americans say that committed to democracy and disciplined are attributes that better describe Harris. About 3 in 10 say these qualities better describe Trump. 4 in 10 say Harris is someone who cares about people like you, while about 3 in 10 say that about Trump. 4 in 10 say honest better describes Harris. 24% say that quality better describes Trump. 24% of people are dumb. Just going to tell you. Both parties are racing to define Harris as she prepares to accept the Democratic nomination at the party's convention next week. The poll suggests she carries some of the same baggage that weighed down President Joe Biden before he ended his re-election bid, but has advantages over Trump when they're compared to each other, and Democrats continue to be much happier about her candidacy than they were about Biden's. Kamala Harris's presidential campaign is launching a $90 million advertising effort over the next 3 weeks to introduce the Democrat to voters and sharpen the contrast with Republican Donald Trump. The media buy marks her campaign's largest yet investment in messaging to voters, with just 2.5 months until Election Day in November. It comes on the heels of a $50 million worth of ads booked last month shortly after Harris replaced President Joe Biden at the top of the party's ticket. Harris's campaign is buoyed by a rush of fundraising since the switch and is now moving to spend the money in an effort to counter what had been overwhelming spending by Trump and his allies in the days after Biden dropped out. Harris's team said the ad campaign will focus on the vice president's personal narrative, her career as a prosecutor in California, her commitment to standing up to powerful interests, and a contrast with what it termed Trump's dangerous extreme agenda. And finally, Donald Trump will have another opportunity Wednesday to recalibrate his presidential comeback bid, this time with a rally and speech in North Carolina that his campaign is billing as a significant economic address. Set in a Democratic city surrounded by staunchly Republican mountain counties, the event carries both national and local implications for Trump. Republicans are looking for Trump to focus the scattershot arguments and attacks he's made on Vice President Kamala Harris since Democrats elevated her as their presidential nominee. Twice in the last week, Trump has fumbled such an opportunity, first in an hour-long news conference at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, then in a 2.5-hour conversation on the social media platform X with CEO Elon Musk. The latest attempt comes in the state that delivered Trump his closest statewide margin of victory 4 years ago, and that is once again expected to be a battleground in 2024. Yeah, the reason Trump is going to North Carolina on Wednesday is because his numbers are starting to go down in North Carolina, and Harris's numbers are starting to go up. So there you go, folks. All right, let's get to our next story. This is a little bit of breaking news. This is by the Associated Press out of Phoenix, dated August 14th. An informational pamphlet for voters who will decide whether to guarantee the constitutional right to an abortion can refer to a fetus as an unborn human being. That's according to a ruling by the Arizona Supreme Court Wednesday. The justices sided with Republican lawmakers over the proponents of the ballot measure on abortion rights. Arizona voters will get to decide in November whether to add the right to an abortion to the state constitution. The Arizona Secretary of State's office said Monday that it had certified 577,971 signatures, far above the required number that the coalition supporting the ballot measure had to submit in order to put the question before voters. Democrats have made abortion rights a central message since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, and it is a key part of their efforts in this year's elections. So again, that's breaking news out of Arizona. Right now, let's get to some of the primary results. First, let's go to Minnesota. This is Steve Karnowski writing for the Associated Press, dated August 14th out of Minneapolis. Great news! Democratic U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar, one of the progressive House members known as the Squad, and a sharp critic of how Israel has conducted the war in Gaza, has won her primary race in Minnesota. Omar successfully defended her Minneapolis area 5th District seat against a repeat challenge from former Minneapolis City Council member Don Samuels, a more centrist liberal, whom she only narrowly defeated in the 2022 primary. Speaking to supporters in Minneapolis, Omar echoed some of the themes of the Harris-Walz presidential campaign. She said, quote, "We run the politics of joy because we know it is joyful to fight for your neighbors. We know it is joyful to make sure housing is a human right. We know it is joyful to fight for health care to be a human right. We know it is joyful to want to live in a peaceful and equitable world," end of quote. Omar avoided the fate of two fellow Squad members. Representative Cori Bush lost the Democratic nomination in her Missouri district last week, and Representative Jamal Bowman of New York lost his primary in June. Both faced well-funded challengers and millions of dollars in spending by the United Democracy Project, a super political action committee affiliated with the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, which appeared to sit out the Minnesota race. Samuels had criticized Omar's condemnation of the Israeli government's handling of the Israel-Hamas war, while Omar has also criticized Hamas for attacking Israel and taking hostages. Samuels said she's one-sided and divisive. She also stressed public safety issues in Minneapolis, where a former police officer murdered George Floyd in 2020. Samuels said he was very disappointed with his loss. In an interview, he said, quote, "What I was hoping is that a strong ground game and an attention to the details of folks who felt left out would trump an overwhelming superiority in dollars. Clearly, money matters a little more in politics than I had hoped," end of quote. Omar reported raising about $6.2 million. Samuels raised about $1.4 million. Omar will now face Republican Dalia al-Aqidi, an Iraqi-American journalist and self-described secular Muslim who calls Omar pro-Hamas. Meanwhile, conservative populist and former NBA player Royce White defeated Navy veteran Joe Frazier in Minnesota's primary election for the Republican nomination to challenge Democratic U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar in November. And former federal prosecutor Joe Tirab, supported by Donald Trump, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and the National Republican Congressional Committee, won a contested Republican primary for Minnesota's 2nd District seat held by Democratic Representative Angie Craig. His opponent, defense attorney Taylor Rahm, won the endorsement at the district convention with support from grassroots conservatives. While Rahm announced in July that he was suspending his campaign and would instead serve as a senior advisor for Trump's Minnesota campaign, he remained on the ballot. Tirab will face Craig in what's expected to be Minnesota's most competitive House race in November. In a statement, Tirab said, quote, "Tonight's definitive results send a clear message that Republicans are united and ready for change. We are ready to support candidates who will strengthen our economy, secure the border, and restore safety in our communities," end of quote. Craig issued a statement calling him, quote, "a guy who recently moved to the district because he saw a political opportunity," end of quote. Craig continued, quote, "He's a guy who has spent months doing anything to win the support of Washington Republicans, and he's a guy who has made it his life's mission to take away reproductive freedoms from families and give those decisions to politicians," end of quote. In the U.S. Senate race, White, an ally of imprisoned former Trump aide Steve Bannon and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, shocked many political observers when he defeated Frazier at the party convention for the Republican endorsement. White's social media comments have been denounced as misogynist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, and profane. His legal and financial problems include unpaid child support and questionable campaign spending, including $1,200 spent at a Florida strip club after he lost his primary challenge to Omar in 2022. He argues that as a black man, he can broaden the party's base by appealing to voters of color in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area and others disillusioned with establishment politics. Following his win, White said in a post on the social platform X, quote, "Bring it on, commies. The people are coming," end of quote. That son of a bitch doesn't know a commie if one would bite him in the ass. Democratic leaders denounced him as a far-right extremist. Ken Martin, the state Democratic Party chair, said in a statement, quote, "While Royce White's language and policy seek to divide Minnesotans, Senator Amy Klobuchar is focused on bringing people together to get things done, and she is consistently ranked as one of the most bipartisan and effective legislators in the Senate. The choice this November cannot be more clear," end of quote. Fraser said earlier that White's confrontational style and message won't attract the moderates and independents needed for a competitive challenge against Klobuchar, who's seeking a fourth term. He said he offered a more mainstream approach stressing fiscal conservatism, a strong defense, world leadership, and small government. Fraser has also highlighted his 26 years in the Navy, where he was an intelligence officer and served a combat tour in Iraq. Neither had anywhere near the resources Klobuchar has. White last reported raising $133,000, while Fraser took in $68,000. Klobuchar, meanwhile, has collected about $19 million this cycle and has more than $6 million available to spend on the general election campaign. She faced only nominal primary opposition. Another clash between establishment and grassroots Republicans played out in western Minnesota's 7th District. Trump-backed Republican Representative Michelle Fischbach, considered one of the most conservative members of Congress, defeated small businessman Steve Boyd. Boyd ran to her right on a religious platform and blocked her from getting endorsement at the district convention. Boyd reported spending $170,000, while Fischbach spent over $1 million. Among the legislative primaries on the ballot Tuesday, Democrats picked former state Senator Ann Johnson Stewart to face Republican Kathleen Falk in a high-stakes race that will determine not only which party controls the state Senate, but whether Democrats maintain their narrow trifecta control of both chambers and the governor's office. Democrats used that power to pass an ambitious agenda over the last 2 years that helped put Governor Tim Walz on the radar of Vice President Kamala Harris before she picked him to be her running mate. It will be the only state Senate seat in the November ballot. The seat in the western Minneapolis suburbs had been held by Democrat Kelly Morrison, who will face Republican Tad Jude for Minnesota's 3rd congressional district seat. So there's the latest on what's happening in Minnesota. Let's get to our next story out of Wisconsin. This is Scott Bauer writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 14th out of Madison. Wisconsin voters on Tuesday rejected Republican-authored ballot questions that would have limited the governor's power to spend federal money that comes to the state for such things as disaster relief, a big win for Democrats who mobilized against them. In Wisconsin's closely watched U.S. Senate race, Republican businessman Eric Hovda, who was endorsed by Donald Trump, easily won the primary. He advances to face Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin in a race that could determine majority control of the chamber. And in 2 competitive congressional primaries, Trump-backed Republican Tony Wyde defeated a current and former state lawmaker in northeastern Wisconsin, and Democrat Rebecca Cook beat a state lawmaker in western Wisconsin. Wyde will face Democrat Kristen Lyerly, a doctor who sued to protect abortion rights in the race for the open 8th congressional district seat. Cook will try to knock off incumbent Representative Derek Van Orden, a former Navy SEAL who is one of Trump's loudest backers in the 3rd district. While the Trump-backed Wyde won his race, 2 of Trump's biggest supporters in the legislature, including one endorsed by Trump, lost in primaries to more moderate Republicans. State Representative Janelle Brandtjen, who Trump endorsed, lost in a primary to current State Senator Dan Knodel, a race between two Republican incumbents created under newly drawn legislative districts. And former State Representative Tim Rathman lost to State Senator Dan Fein. Both Brandtjen and Rathman had pushed to decertify President Joe Biden's 2020 victory. Rejection of the ballot measures was a huge win for liberals. Democrats, including Governor Tony Evers and a host of liberal groups and others, organized against the amendments. They had argued adopting them would slow down the distribution of money when it needs to be spent quickly. Evers said in a statement, quote, "This was a referendum on our administration's work and the future for Wisconsin we've been working hard to build together, and the answer is reflected in the people's vote tonight," end of quote. Republican backers argued the measures would have added more oversight and serve as a check on the governor's powers. Republicans pushed the amendments after taking issue with Evers having the power to distribute billions of dollars in COVID-19 federal relief money without legislative approval. In the Senate race, Hubda faced only nominal opposition and has been running as the presumptive nominee for months. He's already spent at least $13 million of his own money on the race to knock off Baldwin, who ran unopposed in her party's primary as she seeks a third term. Baldwin has attacked Hubda as an out-of-touch California bank owner, while Hubda argues Baldwin is too liberal for Wisconsin. Hubda previously ran for the Senate in 2012 but lost in the primary. In northeastern Wisconsin's 8th Congressional District, Wyde defeated State Senator Andre Jacques and former State Senator Roger Roth. Wyde formerly owned a gas station chain and is running his first campaign for office. Trump endorsed Wyde in April before he had officially entered the race. His primary victory was an early test of Trump's support in a heavily Republican part of Wisconsin. The seat is open due to former Representative Mike Gallagher stepping down before his term was over in April. In western Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District, Democrat Cook defeated longtime State Representative Katrina Shankland and political newcomer Eric Wilson. Cook previously ran in 2022 for the seat but lost in the primary. The 36-year-old Cook is a former small business owner and political fundraiser. She currently runs a nonprofit. The district is a target for Democrats as they seek to win back majority control of the House. The district had been represented by a Democrat for 26 years before it flipped in 2022 and is the most competitive district in the state. The election was also the first under new legislative maps more favorable to Democrats. Legislative incumbents faced each other in 6 primaries, including 4 assembly races where the new maps pitted them against each other. The winners in Tuesday's primaries will face off in November when all 99 seats in the Assembly and half in the Senate are on the ballot. And right now, let's go to Texas. This is the Associated Press dated August 13th out of Houston. Former Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner was picked Tuesday as the Democrats' nominee to succeed the late U.S. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who died last month after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The 69-year-old Turner will appear on the November ballot after securing the most support from local Democratic precinct chairs during a party meeting in Houston. Jackson Lee had already won the Democratic nomination for what would have been a 16th term before her death on July 19th, leaving party officials to select her replacement. Turner left the mayor's office in January after serving 8 years, the most allowed by term limits. He was previously a longtime state lawmaker. The House district in Houston is solidly Democratic. Turner will face Republican challenger Lana Santonze. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Bill Clinton were among those who paid tribute to Jackson at her funeral this month. She was 74. All right, let's go on to Connecticut. They had a primary up there. This is Susan High writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 13th. Matt Corey, a Connecticut entrepreneur who unsuccessfully ran for the U.S. House and Senate in the past, won the Republican nomination Tuesday to take on Democratic U.S. Senator Chris Murphy again, saying he believes voters are more receptive to his message. Corey, whose victory in the primary came against Jerry Smith, the top elected official in the small town of Beacon Falls, said voters are fed up with high energy costs, inflation, and job losses. In a phone interview, he said, quote, "It's just affordability, job opportunities. It's pretty much similar to what I ran last time. And all the policies that are coming out of Washington and what Senator Murphy is embracing, it's not going to move Connecticut forward or any of these businesses forward." End of quote. Corey, who bills himself as the fighter Donald Trump needs by his side on his campaign signs, credited his win to hard work and strong volunteer support. Smith received the party's endorsement at the state convention in May, but Corey got enough delegate support to run in the primary. In a nighttime post on the social platform X, Corey thanked Connecticut Republicans and added, quote, "I am deeply honored by the trust you have placed on me." End of quote. Connecticut voters have not elected a Republican to the Senate since the late Lowell P. Weicker in 1982. Murphy has a huge fundraising advantage. As of June 30th, he had $9.7 million in cash on hand for the general election, according to federal election records, compared with $32,000 for Corey as of July 24th. But Corey was dismissive of the senator's large war chest. Corey, who called on Murphy to defend those policies in a debate, said, quote, $9 million doesn't make you a great representation of Connecticut. It just hides your policies better. End of quote. Corey served in the Navy from 1982 to 1987 and was deployed to Beirut in 1983. A small businessman, he owned a window cleaning business for high-rise businesses in the state for more than 30 years. He also owned a pub in Hartford and now owns and operates a pub at a golf course in East Hartford. Corey also ran 3 times and lost in the Hartford area's heavily Democratic 1st Congressional District and waged an unsuccessful state Senate campaign in 2020. The primary came as candidates in the state's most competitive congressional race were already set. A rematch between Representative Johanna Haynes, a Democrat seeking a 4th term, and Republican George Logan, a former state senator. Logan, who lost to Hayes in 2022 by about 2,000 votes from 250,000 cast, was nominated by party leaders and didn't need to compete in a primary this year. Also Tuesday, Dr. Michael Goldstein, an ophthalmologist and lawyer, won the Republican nomination in Connecticut's 4th Congressional District. Goldstein, who is from Greenwich and lost a primary in the same district 2 years ago, defeated Bob McGuffey, a leader in the state's Tea Party movement. Goldstein will now challenge Democratic U.S. Representative Jim Himes, who is seeking his 9th term in November. Goldstein said he will use his background as a physician to help reduce medical costs. He has also pledged to better secure the border, restore energy independence, improve the economy, protect parental rights, and fight anti-Semitism. So there you go, folks. And right now, let's get to our next story here. This is about an election that happened 4 years ago for a mayor in Newbern, Alabama, but that has now been settled after a court fight. This is Kim Chandler writing for the Associated Press. This is dated July 25th. The first black mayor of a small Alabama town who had been locked out of town hall by white officials is returning to the job. Mayor Patrick Braxton is being recognized as the mayor of the town of Newbern under a lawsuit settlement ending a long-running dispute over control of the town government. U.S. District Judge Christy K. Dubose approved the agreement Tuesday, opening the way for Braxton to take over as the town's first black mayor and for the possible seating of the town's first majority black town council. The settlement also will require the town to begin holding municipal elections for the first time in decades. In a statement issued by the Legal Defense Fund, Mayor Patrick Braxton said, quote, "This victory marks a new chapter for Newbern," end of quote. The Legal Defense Fund represented Braxton and other residents in a lawsuit. Braxton continued, quote, "I am so grateful to finally get to serve the people of Newbern. This is a win for not only me, but for all the residents of Newbern. After decades, we will finally be able to act as citizens to cast our ballots and actively participate in the democratic process," end of quote. Newbern, a tiny town of 133 people about 40 miles west of Selma, has a mayor-council government but did not hold elections for 6 decades. Instead, town officials govern through hand-me-down positions, with the mayor appointing a successor and the successor appointing council members, according to the lawsuit filed by Braxton and others. That practice resulted in an overwhelmingly white government in a town where black residents outnumber white residents by a 2-to-1 margin. Braxton, a black volunteer firefighter, qualified in 2020 to run for the nonpartisan position of mayor. Since he was the only person to run, he became the town's mayor-elect. But Braxton said that he and the town council he appointed were blocked from exercising their duties. A lawsuit filed by Braxton and others said that the existing Newbern town officials changed the locks on the town hall and refused to give Braxton the town bank account information. The lawsuit also alleged that the outgoing council held a secret meeting to set up a special election and fraudulently reappointed themselves as the town council. Town officials had denied wrongdoing. Before agreeing to settle the case, the defendants maintained in court filings that Braxton's claim to be mayor was invalid. Under the terms of the settlement, Braxton will be immediately recognized as mayor and be granted access to town hall. All other individuals holding themselves out as town officials will effectively resign and/or cease all responsibilities with respect to serving in any town position or maintaining any town property or accounts, according to the plan. The Newburgh City Council positions will be filled either by appointment or special election. The town will also hold municipal elections in 2025. Richard Rauco, an attorney for the plaintiffs, said, quote, "The settlement achieves that goal the plaintiffs have always sought, which is recognizing Patrick Braxton as the elected mayor of Newbern and having a town council that represents the residents of Newbern. The settlement puts an end to the practice of hand-me-down government and requires the mayor and town council to hold regular elections as provided under state law." End of quote. So some really good news there out of Newbern, Alabama. And congratulations to Mayor Braxton on finally getting the keys to town hall and getting the bank accounts so he can do his job properly. Right now, let's get to our next story here. Tuesday night, Trump went on X and was interviewed by Elon Musk for over 2.5 hours, where they basically patted each other on the back for firing people. In Trump's case, basically patting Elon Musk on the back for firing workers who were trying to strike. That has now started a lawsuit filed by the United Auto Workers Union against Donald Trump and Elon Musk, saying that they violated federal law when they fired people who were trying to organize collectively under a union, because that is illegal under federal law. You cannot fire people for wanting to form a union. So let's get to this story. More bad news for Elon Musk. This is Nicholas Liu writing for Salon.com. This is dated August 5th. Residents in battleground states are submitting personal information to a pro-Trump PAC whose website invites them to register to vote. But instead of actually registering any voters, the PAC is just storing their precious voter data. Now, Michigan's top elections official is opening an investigation in the so-called America PAC, which was founded and partially funded by billionaire Tesla CEO Elon Musk, for potential violations of state election law. In a statement to CNBC, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, a Democrat, said through a spokeswoman, quote, "Every citizen should know exactly how their personal information is being used by PACs, especially if an entity is claiming it will help people register to vote in Michigan or any other state." End of quote. When visitors to the PAC's website access the page from safe Democratic or Republican states, they are typically directed to an actual voter registration page. However, those who enter zip codes in a battleground state like Pennsylvania or Georgia are given a highly detailed form in which they are prompted to submit their address, cell phone number, and age. Even after the user submits that information, the website does not help them register to vote, despite promising to do so, instead steering them toward a thank you page. As of August 4th, following criticism of the deceptive tactic, the form disappeared from the website. According to CNBC, which was the first to report on America PAC, the committee has spent over $21 million since June on canvassing digital media, text message services, and phone calls, according to Federal Election Commission filings. Around $800,000 of that money went into digital marketing ads targeted at voters in battleground states, with many encouraging voters to visit their website and register to vote. Brendan Fisher, Deputy Executive Director at Campaign Finance Watchdog Documented, told CNBC, quote, America PAC is focusing on door-to-door canvassing in support of Trump. I think it is safe to assume that the voter data gathered through these digital appeals are going to inform America PAC's canvassing and other political activities, end of quote. Fisher noted that FEC ruling permits billionaire-funded PACs and presidential campaigns to directly coordinate on door-to-door canvassing activities, which, quote, ensures that the PAC's activities are maximally beneficial to the campaign and frees up the campaign's own funds for other use, end of quote. Some legal experts say the Musk-backed PAC's deceptive tactics might be legal. Barbara McQuaid, a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, said in an email to CNBC on Sunday, quote, I am not aware of any laws being broken, end of quote. Musk is not the only tech executive bankrolling the effort. America PAC, which raised more than $8 million between April 1st and June 30th, has also received donations from venture capitalist Doug Leone, as well as cryptocurrency investors Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss. It has also, according to CNBC, received funds from a company run by Palantir co-founder Joe Lonsdale. The records do not yet list Musk as a donor, though he has said separately that he is making donations to the committee. Musk's support for the PAC comes after he's used his social media platform X to amplify pro-Trump voices and manipulate community guidelines to suppress anti-Trump speech. Last week, he violated his own platform's rules in sharing a doctored video of Vice President Kamala Harris, with X also temporarily suspending several pro-Harris accounts. So there you go with that. Elon Musk up to no good. And I hope that Jocelyn Benson, and for that matter, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, nab his little ass and throw it in jail, which would be great. And right now, let's get to our next story. This is Marin Scotton writing for Salon.com. This is dated August 14th. Listen to this interesting statistic. Democratic nominee Kamala Harris has become more popular among voters who previously weren't a fan of President Joe Biden or Donald Trump. That is according to a new Monmouth University poll. This group of voters, known as double haters, has been cut in half since Harris took over from Biden as the Democratic presidential candidate. When Biden was still running, nearly 1 in 5 voters did not have a favorable view of either Biden or Trump. Now, just 8% of voters have a negative view of both Harris and Trump. In June, a previous poll found that 54% of double haters did not support Biden or Trump. In the current poll, Harris now has the support of 53% of that same group, with just 11% backing Trump. Patrick Murray, director of the Monmouth poll, said in a statement, quote, taking Biden out of the mix and replacing him with Harris has significantly altered a key metric in this race. As we reported last month, Trump-Biden double haters want to shake things up, but they are wary of change that is too authoritarian. Harris appears to provide most of this group with the fresh outlook they desire. End of quote. Harris's nomination also increased support for Democrats among voters aged 18 to 35, with 53% supporting her compared to just 33% who supported Biden. Another recent poll conducted by the Swing State Project shows Harris leads Trump by 48 to 47% across 7 combined battleground states. She is tied with Trump in Georgia, but leads in Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Trump leads Harris in Nevada 47 to 42%. But I'm pretty sure that's going to slim up as well. Because Donnie's losing his mind. He's already lost his mind. I'm just going to tell you. Some of the stuff he says is just absolute wackadoodle stuff. And I want to get to one final story. This is Sarah Leach writing at her Substack account. Sarah Leach is the former Holland Sentinel writer who was fired for talking to another member of the media. This story is dated August 11th out of Lansing, and it has to do with Ottawa Impact. Listen to this, folks. As a federal judge considers whether to order Michigan State University Extension to reinstate Ottawa County's newest commissioner to his job, the school's representatives confirmed for the first time Friday they were politically pressured by board leadership to alter his employment. Chris Kleinjans filed a lawsuit June 21st in Michigan's U.S. Western District Court claiming MSU's extension violated his First Amendment rights after giving him an ultimatum after he was elected in a special recall election May 7th. Take an unpaid leave through the remainder of the year or face termination. Kleinjans worked for the extension as a nutritional instructor for more than a dozen years prior to his dismissal June 4th. The lawsuit claims MSU's reasoning was due to bowing to political pressure from the Ottawa Impact majority on the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners. The university's leadership has said that, quote, because of the nature of the work that we do within the county, it's impossible to separate the work of extension and the role of county commissioner, end of quote. However, an attorney for MSU said Kleinjan's dismissal, though unfortunate, had nothing to do with the school's relationship with the county. Of course, we know all about Ottawa Impact since they took office in January of 2023. They've been sued multiple times. They still have lawsuits pending against them by John Gibbs, their former county administrator, for wrongful dismissal. So let me skip a little bit here. During an evidentiary hearing in the Western District's courthouse in Lansing, Kleinjan said in testimony that after being seated, quote, they immediately began making, charitably speaking, aggressive decisions. It was a different interpretation of freedom than what we were operating under before, end of quote. A recall petition targeted one OI commissioner, Lucy Ebel, and Kleinjan's ultimately was the Democrat who defeated her by a 20% margin in May. According to Kleinjan's lawsuit, the OI majority placed political pressure on MSU to retaliate against Kleinjan's after he was selected as the Democrat to run in the recall election. 2 weeks after winning the May 7th recall election, Kleinjan said he was blindsided by MSU when management told him his employment was in jeopardy. According to the lawsuit filed by Kleinjan's attorney Sarah Riley Howard, MSU did not have, quote, a non-discriminatory reason to fire, end of quote, Kleinjan's, and, quote, have merely capitulated to the OI majority, end of quote. Kleinjan said he relied on many conversations since the summer of 2023 with his managers about his possible candidacy, which couldn't be confirmed until after the county clerk's office finalized the special election for the May ballot on November 27th. Kleinjan said, quote, when I knew I was going to be a candidate against one of their commissioners, I was terrified and wanted advice from my supervisors, end of quote. During testimony Friday, Kleinjan said he was concerned that MSU Extension's contract, often referred to as a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement with Ottawa County, hadn't been approved, despite getting cleared by the County Commission's OI-controlled Finance and Administration Subcommittee on November 7th. The committee unanimously approved the contract to continue extension services through fiscal year 2024, which began last October 1st and will end this upcoming September 30th for $272,572. In the contract, the county agrees to provide office space, utilities, clerical support, and funding for an extension educator, which covers the 4-H programming coordinator in the county. Kleinjan said he thought his candidacy would be announced after the new year, but was informed by the clerk's office that once the recall election was certified for May, the county Democrats had 10 days to announce their candidate and file the respective paperwork. When the announcement was made on December 6th, the contract with MSU still hadn't been approved by the full Board of Commissioners. Kleingens testified Friday, quote, "I was terribly concerned at this point. I knew exactly how the Board of Commissioners would react. They would take it out on who I was working for. The chair would take Mr. Kelly and Mr. Korpak to the carpet for that." End of quote. Kleingens was referring to M. Scott Korpak, the new District 7 director, who was learning the ropes with then interim director James Kelly. The two directors were scheduled to meet with board chair Joe Moss, Ottawa Impact's founder and president, along with OI Commissioner Allison Miedema on December 7th, one day after Kleingens' candidacy was publicly announced. Associate Director of the Extension's Field Operations Matt Shane told Kleingens in a November 27th audio recording that was submitted into evidence on Friday, quote, "The intent of the meeting initially was to provide some information to Commissioner Miedema about extension programs because she's the extension liaison from the Board of Commissioners." End of quote. The conversation soon pivoted, however, to Kleingens and his work with extension and in the county. Shane tells Kleingens on the recording, quote, "Throughout the course of the conversation, obviously it shifted a little bit to some of our work with Ottawa Food in particular, and your role with them and your membership on the board and those things. So that was all discussed and addressed in fairly generic terms. They talked about you stepping down from that board and separating from those responsibilities." End of quote. Shane explained in the recording that Kelly and Korpak told Moss and Miedema that Kleingens was in compliance with university policies in terms of the school's employment handbook. Shane tells Kleingens on November 27th, quote, "They don't necessarily agree with our university policies around you being able to perform your job responsibilities in a mutual fashion and campaign for a board seat at the same time. But we explain that those two things are done separately, that you have rights as a private citizen and a resident of Ottawa County to run for that seat. They don't like it, they don't agree with it, but nonetheless it is what it is." End of quote. Moss has not returned several requests for comment in relation to the Kleingens versus MSU lawsuit. Both Shane and Korpak testified at Friday's hearing. Korpak said Friday it was unusual for Extension's annual contract renewal to not be approved by December. In previous years, it was fully approved no later than October. Korpak testified Friday, quote, "It was odd that the Finance and Administration approved it and that it was pulled from the consent agenda." End of quote. He noted that the contract was pulled from consideration of the Board of Commissioners one day after local media outlet Fox 17 reported November 13th that Ottawa Food was suspending its operations after the OI-controlled board cut the health department's health budget, which led to the elimination of a county-funded food coordinator. At the time, Kleingens sat on Ottawa Food's advisory board and helped draft a press release for the collaboration of over 45 local agencies that helps populations with food insecurities. He said politics didn't factor into his involvement with the announcement. He said, quote, "No one had experience in drafting press releases, so I volunteered to do it." End of quote. Kleingens' attorney, Sarah Riley Howard, asked Korpak if he and Kelly planned to use the December 7th meeting with Moss and Miedema to inquire about the status of Extension's contract. Korpak testified, quote, "We were curious, yes." End of quote. When asked how he interpreted Moss addressing Kleingens' employment, Korpak said, quote, "You could characterize it as a veiled threat of concern with Christians' involvement in the recall process. They were unhappy about his political activity." End of quote. And we are running out of time right now, so what we will do is we will post this story on our official Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show to read the full story from Sarah Leach. Getting a guy fired because he's running as a Democrat against one of your hand-picked people. It's disgusting. And quite frankly, I think criminal charges should be brought. You want my opinion on it? That's going to be it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.